The air in Leslie's cozy suburban home was thick with the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon-spiced cider. Christmas lights twinkled along the mantel, casting a warm glow over the living room where the family bustled in preparation for the holiday dinner. Molly, her dark hair tied back in a loose bun, moved between the kitchen and dining room, arranging silverware with practiced ease. At 35, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, her smile bright but tinged with the fatigue of the season's demands. Her husband, Tucker, 39, and perpetually distracted by work, was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of gravy while glancing at his phone. Their son, Kieran, a 6-year-old bundle of energy with his father's hazel eyes, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, engrossed in a sprawling Lego creation. In the corner of the room, Leslie, Tucker's 65-year-old mother, reclined in her favourite armchair. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, and she sipped coffee from a chipped mug, her eyes fixed on the flickering television. A holiday movie played, but she seemed only half interested, her expression distant. Leslie had always been the matriarch, commanding attention with her sharp opinions, but today she seemed content to let the chaos of the gathering unfold around her. Kieran's voice broke the hum of activity. "Grandma, look! I made a spaceship!" He held up a lopsided Lego structure, his face alight with pride. The blocks wobbled in his small hands, a testament to his effort. Leslie's gaze didn't shift from the screen. "Grandma?" Kieran tried again, scooting closer, his voice hopeful. "It's got lasers and everything." Leslie took a slow sip of her coffee, her silence loud in its indifference. She adjusted her glasses, as if Kieran's words were background noise, no more significant than the movie's canned laughter. Molly, pausing with a stack of plates in her hands, glanced over from the dining room. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she brushed it off, assuming Leslie was just distracted. Then Whitney, Heather's 6-year-old daughter, bounced into the room, her blonde curls bobbing. "Grandma, can I have a cookie?" she asked, tugging at Leslie's sleeve. Instantly, Leslie's face transformed. Her eyes softened, and a warm smile spread across her lips. "Oh, my sweet girl, of course you can," she cooed, setting her mug down and pulling Whitney onto her lap. "You're getting so big, aren't you? Just like your mama, so bright and beautiful." She smoothed Whitney's hair, her voice dripping with affection as she planted a kiss on her forehead. Molly froze, the plates still in her hands. The contrast was stark, undeniable. Kieran, just a few feet away, had been invisible to Leslie, his eager attempts to connect dismissed without a glance. But Whitney? Whitney was a treasure, worthy of Leslie's full attention. Molly's chest tightened as she watched the scene unfold. She had noticed Leslie's coolness toward Kieran before, small moments, easily excused as fatigue or distraction. But this was different. This was deliberate. A clear preference laid bare in the glow of Christmas lights. Her gaze drifted to Kieran, who was still on the floor, his spaceship forgotten in his hands. He watched Leslie and Whitney, a small, wistful smile on his face. He didn't seem hurt, not yet, but the innocence in his expression, the way he accepted the moment without question, pierced Molly's heart. She set the plates down quietly, her fingers trembling, and glanced at Tucker in the kitchen. He was still stirring, oblivious, his focus split between the gravy and some work email. Tucker was a good man, a loving father, but he often missed the undercurrents in his family, especially when it came to his mother. Molly's eyes returned to Kieran, and a quiet resolve settled over her. She couldn't let this pass, not when it was her son's heart at stake. Leslie was Kieran's only grandmother, the only chance he had for that special bond Molly had never known growing up. She wouldn't let favoritism steal that from him. Not this Christmas, not ever. Molly stood rooted in the dining room, the stack of plates forgotten on the table behind her. The chatter of the Christmas gathering, Whitney's laughter, Tucker's low hum as he worked, the clink of glasses, faded into a dull hum. Her eyes were locked on Kieran, still sitting on the living room floor, his Lego spaceship cradled in his lap. He was watching Leslie and Whitney, his small smile tinged with something Molly recognized all too well, the quiet ache of being overlooked. Leslie's arms were wrapped around Whitney, her voice a warm melody of praise, while Kieran might as well have been a shadow. Molly's throat tightened, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, glancing around to ensure no one had noticed. Her heart pounded with a mix of anger and sorrow, but it was the sight of Kieran's innocent acceptance that cut the deepest. He wasn't crying or pouting. He was just there, content to watch his cousin bask in the love he craved. Molly's chest ached with the weight of it. She couldn't let him grow up feeling invisible, not the way she had. Her gaze flickered to Tucker, still in the kitchen, his broad shoulders hunched over the stove. He was engrossed as always, his phone propped against a canister of flour, likely checking work emails between stirs. Molly loved him fiercely, his dedication, his steady presence, but his tunnel vision often left her to navigate the family's emotional currents alone. She couldn't bring herself to tell him about his mother's behavior, not yet. Tucker adored Leslie, and the last thing Molly wanted was to drive a wedge between them. But this wasn't about Tucker. This was about Kieran. Molly took a shaky breath and crossed the room, kneeling beside her son. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "What's this amazing spaceship you've got here?" Kieran's face lit up, his hazel eyes sparkling. "It's got a control room, see?" He pointed to a cluster of red and blue blocks. "And these are the lasers for fighting aliens." His enthusiasm spilled out, his hands animated as he described every detail. Molly listened, nodding, her smile genuine but strained. She ruffled his hair, pulling him into a gentle hug. And for a moment, the world was just the two of them, safe in their bubble of love. But as Kieran chattered, Molly's mind drifted to her own childhood. She had been younger than Kieran when her parents died in a car accident, leaving her to grow up in her aunt's crowded household. There, among cousins who had their own parents, Molly had been the odd one out, the child no one quite knew what to do with. Love and attention was scarce, doled out in fleeting moments when her aunt wasn't overwhelmed. Molly had spent years dreaming of what it would be like to have a mother's embrace, a father's pride. She'd promised herself that her own child would never know that longing. Leslie was Kieran's only grandmother, the only chance he had for that special bond. Molly had always hoped Leslie would fill that role, showering Kieran with the warmth she'd never had. But now, watching Leslie lavish affection on Whitney while dismissing Kieran, Molly felt that old, familiar ache resurface. Not for herself, but for her son. She couldn't let history repeat itself. Kieran deserved better. Molly kissed Kieran's forehead and stood, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't confront Tucker yet. She knew how much he cherished his mother, and she didn't want to tarnish that. But she couldn't ignore this either. There had to be a way to bridge the gap, to make Leslie see Kieran for the bright, loving boy he was. Molly didn't know how, but she would find a way. For Kieran's sake, she would try to build, not break, this family. As she returned to setting the table, her heart heavy but determined, she knew this Christmas was only the beginning. The living room of Vigliano, tucked into the corner of Leslie's suburban home, felt smaller now, the Christmas lights casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. The clatter of dishes had softened, replaced by the murmur of voices from the kitchen and the faint jingle of a holiday tune on the radio. Molly stood near the dining table, her hands still trembling from the weight of what she'd witnessed earlier. Leslie's blatant favoritism, the way she'd ignored Kieran's eager attempts to connect while showering Whitney with affection. Her heart churned with a mix of anger and grief, each beat a reminder of her son's quiet, uncomplaining smile. She couldn't let this fester any longer. Leslie sat in her armchair, the empty coffee mug on the table beside her, her silver hair catching the light as she stared at the television. Whitney had run off to play and Kieran was still on the floor, piecing together his Lego spaceship with a focus that broke Molly's heart. She needed to act now, before the moment slipped away. "Kieran, honey," Molly said, crouching beside him, her voice soft but strained. "Why don't you go find Whitney and show her your spaceship in the other room?" Kieran's face lit up, and he nodded, clutching his creation as he scampered off. Molly watched him go, her chest tightening. She didn't want him to hear this. She straightened, smoothing her sweater, and approached Leslie, her pulse thudding in her ears. "Mom," she said, the word tasting hollow, a bridge she'd built but never crossed. Leslie's eyes flicked up, sharp and guarded, and Molly's stomach twisted. She grabbed a bowl of salad from the table, a flimsy pretext, and sat on the couch beside the armchair. "Can we talk for a minute?" Leslie's lips pursed, her gaze narrowing. "What's this about, Molly?" Her tone was clipped, like she was already bracing for a fight. Molly set the salad down, her fingers clenching in her lap. She felt like a child again, standing in her aunt's kitchen, begging for a scrap of attention. But this wasn't about her. It was about Kieran. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "I was just thinking about the kids," she started, her voice carefully even. "They're growing so fast. Whitney's so lively, and Kieran, he's always creating something new, like that spaceship he was showing you earlier." Leslie's expression softened, but not for Kieran. "Oh, Whitney's a gem," she said, her voice warming. "So bright, so full of life. She's got Heather's spirit, you know. She's going to do big things." She smiled, a rare softness in her eyes, and Molly's hope withered. Not a word about Kieran, not a glance. "And Kieran?" Molly pressed, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. "Did you see his spaceship? He was so proud of it, trying to show you all day." Her eyes searched Leslie's face, desperate for a flicker of warmth, but found only a dismissive shrug. "He's distant," Leslie said, her tone flat, like she was stating a fact. "Always off in his own world. Maybe he needs to see someone about his speech. Have you thought about that?" Molly's breath caught, a sharp pain slicing through her. Her vision blurred, hot tears threatening to spill, but she blinked them back. "His speech," she repeated, her voice rising before she caught herself. "Kieran's fine, Mom. He's shy sometimes, but he's brilliant. He was trying so hard to get your attention today, and you just ignored him. You were so sweet with Whitney, but with Kieran, it's like he's not even there. Why?" Leslie's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening. "Are you telling me how to treat my grandchildren?" she snapped, her voice low and cutting. "I've raised my kids, Molly. I don't need you lecturing me." "I'm not lecturing," Molly said, her voice cracking as the dam of her emotions began to break. "I'm begging. Kieran's your grandson too. He's craving your love, and you act like he doesn't exist. I saw it today clear as day. Why can't you say one kind word to him? What's wrong with him?" Her hands shook, and she clasped them tighter, her nails digging into her palms. She felt raw, exposed, like she was 6 years old again, pleading for someone to see her. Leslie leaned back, her smirk cold and sharp, a blade slicing through Molly's fragile hope. "What's wrong with him? Nothing, I suppose. He's just different. Not like Whitney. And frankly, it's none of your business how I handle my family." She crossed her arms, her gaze hard. "You want me to fake it? Put on a show to make you feel better? That's not me." Molly's chest burned, a sob lodging in her throat. She wanted to scream, to shake Leslie until she understood the hurt she was causing. Kieran's face flashed in her mind, his small, wistful smile as he watched Leslie cuddle Whitney, and her heart shattered. She'd grown up invisible, a ghost in her aunt's house, and she'd sworn her son would never know that pain. But here it was, dressed in Christmas lights, and Leslie's indifference. Her anger surged, but so did her fear. Of ruining the holiday, of fracturing the family, of failing Kieran. "You're his grandmother," Molly whispered, her voice breaking. "All he wants is for you to care. Can't you give him that? Just a little?" Her eyes pleaded, but Leslie's face remained stone. I don't owe you an explanation, Leslie said, her voice final. And I won't pretend to be something I'm not. If that's all, I'd like to enjoy my coffee in peace. She turned back to the television, dismissing Molly as easily as she dismissed Kieran. Molly stood, her legs unsteady, her heart a tangle of rage and despair. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, not here, not in front of Leslie. She'd tried to build a bridge, to find a way through, but Leslie had burned it down without a second thought. The weight of that failure pressed against her chest, heavy and suffocating. She turned and walked back to the dining room, her steps mechanical, her mind racing. She hadn't changed anything, not Leslie's heart, not Kieran's reality. But she wasn't done. For Kieran's sake, she couldn't be. The Christmas gathering had reached its peak, the living room aglow with the flicker of candles and the sparkle of tinsel. The aroma of turkey and pie lingered, but the warmth of the holiday felt brittle now, strained by the confrontation that still echoed in Molly's mind. She stood near the dining table, her hands gripping the back of a chair, her heart raw from Leslie's cold dismissal. Kieran had returned from playing with Whitney, his Lego spaceship back in his hands, his eyes bright with the innocent hope of a 6-year-old. Molly watched him, her chest tight, willing herself to hold it together for his sake. The front door creaked open and Heather rushed in, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she called, her voice breathless as she shrugged off her coat. "Work was chaos, but I'm here now." Her arrival broke the tension momentarily, and Leslie's face lit up, a rare smile cracking her stern demeanour. "Finally," Leslie said, rising from her armchair with a theatrical flourish. "Now we can get to the good part." She clapped her hands, her eyes sparkling as she addressed the room. "Time for gifts." The announcement drew Whitney instantly, her blonde curls bouncing as she ran to Leslie's side, squealing with excitement. Molly's stomach twisted. She glanced at Kieran, who had perked up at the word gifts, his small hands clutching his spaceship tightly. She wanted to believe Leslie wouldn't exclude him, not in front of everyone, but the knot in her gut told her otherwise. Tucker emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, his brow furrowed as he sensed the shift in the room's energy. But he stayed silent, his focus still half on work, oblivious to the storm brewing. Leslie disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a large box wrapped in shimmering gold paper, a red ribbon tied around it like a crown. She knelt before Whitney, her smile radiant. "This is for my special girl," she said, her voice dripping with pride. "Go on, open it." Whitney tore into the paper, her squeals echoing as she revealed a doll she'd been begging for, its porcelain face gleaming under the Christmas lights. "Grandma, I love it!" she cried, throwing her arms around Leslie's neck. Leslie hugged her back, her laughter warm and full. "Look at that smile," Leslie said, brushing a curl from Whitney's face. "You're just like your mama, aren't you? So full of light." She turned to Heather, who beamed with pride, oblivious to the tension coiling around Molly. Kieran watched, his eyes wide with anticipation. He stepped forward, his spaceship still in one hand, his voice small but clear. "Grandma?" he asked, his tone tentative but hopeful. "Is there a gift for me too?" The room froze. Leslie's smile faltered, her eyes locking onto Kieran as if he'd caught her off guard. For a moment silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint crackle of the fireplace. Molly's heart pounded, her hands clenching the chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. She wanted to intervene to shield Kieran, but her throat tightened, words failing her. Leslie straightened, her expression hardening. "A gift," she said, her voice sharp, almost accusatory. "I didn't know you were coming this Christmas, Kieran. Besides, you've got plenty of toys at home, don't you? A spoiled kid like you doesn't need more." She paused, her gaze flicking to Molly with a smirk. "Just like your mother, always expecting something." The words landed like a slap, sharp and stinging. Molly's cheeks burned, her vision blurring with rage and humiliation. Even Whitney, usually a whirlwind of chatter, went quiet, her doll clutched tightly as she sensed the wrongness of the moment. Heather's smile faded, her eyes darting between Leslie and Molly, uncertainty creeping into her expression. Tucker, still near the kitchen doorway, frowned, his towel slipping from his hands, but he hadn't caught the full exchange. Kieran didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He just lowered his head, his small shoulders slumping as he stepped back to his Lego pile, his spaceship forgotten on the floor. That quiet resignation, that acceptance of rejection, shattered Molly's restraint. Her anger surged, a wildfire in her chest, but her voice wouldn't come. She wanted to scream, to demand why Leslie would humiliate her son in front of everyone, but the weight of the moment, the eyes of the family, the fragility of the holiday, choked her. "Leslie," Molly managed, her voice low and trembling, barely audible. "How could you say that to him?" Leslie turned, her smirk unwavering. "What? It's the truth, isn't it?" she said, her tone defiant. "You're always hovering, Molly, making a fuss. Maybe if you didn't coddle him so much, he'd be tougher." Molly's hands shook, her nails digging into her palms. "He's 6, she said, her voice rising, cracking with emotion. "He's your grandson, and you just humiliated him. For what? Because he dared to hope you cared." Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she held Leslie's gaze, refusing to back down. Heather stepped forward, her voice hesitant. "Mum, maybe we should—" "Stay out of this, Heather," Leslie snapped, her eyes never leaving Molly. "This is between me and her." The room felt like it was closing in, the Christmas lights mocking the tension with their cheerful glow. Molly's heart screamed for her to grab Kieran and leave, to protect him from this cruelty, but she couldn't tear her eyes from Leslie's smug expression. She'd tried to be diplomatic, to build bridges, but Leslie had crossed a line. Kieran deserved better than this. Without another word, Molly turned and grabbed her coat and Kieran's from the rack by the door. "Kieran, come on," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Kieran looked up, his eyes wide, and obeyed, clutching his spaceship as he followed her. Molly didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the stunned silence of the family. She strode across the living room, her steps heavy with purpose, and stepped out into the cold night air. In the car, with Kieran buckled into the back seat, Molly gripped the steering wheel, her breaths shallow. She glanced at her son in the rearview mirror, his small face illuminated by the streetlights, still so trusting, so unaware of the depth of what had happened. "You okay, buddy?" she asked, her voice soft. Kieran nodded, his voice quiet. "Yeah, Mommy. Can we build more spaceships at the hotel?" Molly's heart broke all over again, but she forced a smile. "You bet we can." She started the engine, her hands still trembling, and drove toward the hotel, the weight of Leslie's words and Kieran's quiet strength fueling her resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The living room in Leslie's home felt hollow now, the Christmas lights casting a mocking glow over the remnants of the ruined holiday. The gold wrapping paper from Whitney's gift lay crumpled on the floor, and the fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers. Heather stood awkwardly near the couch, clutching Whitney's new doll, her eyes darting between her mother and the door Molly had stormed through. Whitney, sensing the unease, clung to her mother's leg, her usual chatter silenced. Leslie sat back in her armchair, her arms crossed, her smirk fading into a stubborn scowl. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the buzz of Tucker's phone on the kitchen counter. Tucker stood in the doorway, his broad frame tense, his hands still damp from the dish towel he'd dropped when Molly's text came through. "I can't take it anymore. We're at the hotel." The words burned in his mind, each one a stab of guilt for missing the moment that had driven his wife and son away. He'd been in the kitchen, distracted by a work email, while his family unraveled. His chest ached with the weight of it, anger at himself, at his mother, and a desperate need to understand what had happened. "Mom," Tucker said, his voice low but edged with steel as he stepped into the living room. "What the hell just happened?" Leslie's eyes flicked up, her expression defiant. "Don't you take that tone with me, Tucker," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Your wife made a scene. That's what happened. Stormed out like a child because I didn't coddle her precious boy. Tucker's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Coddle him, he repeated, his voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. She told me what you said to Kieran, that he's spoiled, that he doesn't need a gift because he's like his mother. Mum, he's 6, and you humiliated him in front of everyone. Why would you do that? Leslie leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Humiliated? I was being honest. That boy's got everything he needs, and Molly's always hovering, making him soft. You're too busy to see it, but she's got you wrapped around her finger, Tucker. Always has. The accusation hit like a punch, igniting a fire in Tucker's chest. He loved his mother, had always defended her sharp edges, but this was too much. He thought of Kieran's quiet smile, the way he'd clung to his Lego spaceship like a lifeline, and Molly's trembling voice in their last phone call, thick with tears she wouldn't shed. His heart twisted, a deep, aching grief for the pain his family had endured while he'd been blind. He'd failed them, and the shame of it burned. Stop it, Tucker said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and sorrow. You don't get to talk about Molly like that. You don't know her. Not really. And Kieran? He's my son, your grandson, and you treated him like he's nothing. Can't you at least pretend to care about them? Just once? Leslie's face hardened, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. Pretend, she scoffed, though her voice wavered. I'm nice to those who are nice to me, Tucker. Heather's here, taking care of me, while you and Molly are off doing whatever, barely visiting. You think I don't notice? You think I don't feel pushed out? Tucker's shoulders sagged, the weight of her words mingling with his guilt. He'd moved his family for the business, for a better life, but he hadn't realized how deeply his mother felt their absence. Still, that didn't excuse her cruelty. We moved for work, Mom, he said, his voice softer but firm. You know that. But this isn't about visits. This is about you picking favourites, about you hurting my son because you've got some grudge against Molly, and you're wrong about her. You've always been wrong. Leslie's smirk returned, but it was brittle now, a mask for something unsteady. Wrong? She's been riding your back since Kieran was born, Tucker. You're blind to it, always have been. She's got you doing her bidding, and you don't even see it. Tucker's heart pounded, a surge of protectiveness for Molly drowning out his hesitation. He'd dreaded this moment, the day he'd have to shatter his mother's illusions, but there was no turning back. You want the truth? He said, his voice low and steady, each word deliberate. Molly's not riding my back. She's my boss. The company I work for? She founded it. She's the one who built it from nothing, and she asked me to keep it a secret so you wouldn't feel uncomfortable. So I could be the head of the family like you always wanted. That's who Molly is, Mom. She's been protecting me, protecting us, and all you've done is tear her down. The room fell silent, the air thick with the weight of his words. Leslie's face went slack, her eyes wide with shock, the smirk gone. Heather gasped softly, her hand tightening around Whitney's doll, and even Whitney looked up, sensing the shift. Tucker's chest heaved, his throat tight with the release of a truth he'd carried for years. He saw Molly's face in his mind, her strength, her quiet sacrifices, and his love for her swelled, mingled with a piercing regret for not standing up sooner. Leslie opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. That can't be true, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She's been using you, Tucker. No, Tucker cut her off, his voice firm but laced with pain. You've been wrong about her from the start, and it's poisoned the way you see Kieran. He's paying for your mistakes, Mom, and I can't let that happen anymore. He took a step back, his eyes burning with unshed tears. I need to be with my wife and son. We'll talk later. He turned and grabbed his coat, his movements heavy with purpose. As he stepped toward the door, he glanced at Heather, who gave him a small, conflicted nod. Leslie remained in her armchair, her face a mask of stunned disbelief, the weight of her misjudgments crashing down around her. Tucker's heart ached, for his mother, for the family he'd hoped they could be, but his loyalty was clear. Molly and Kieran needed him now, and he wouldn't fail. The truth was out, and maybe, just maybe, it could change things. But for now, he had to get to the hotel, to hold his wife and son, and to start rebuilding what had been broken. The hotel room was small and sterile, its beige walls and generic artwork a stark contrast to the warmth of Leslie's Christmas-lit home. A single lamp cast a soft glow over the double bed where Kieran lay, curled up with his Lego spaceship, his small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of sleep. The hum of the heater was the only sound, a faint comfort against the cold December night pressing against the window. Molly sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her dark hair loose and tangled from the drive. Her eyes, red-rimmed from unshed tears, traced the contours of Kieran's face, his soft cheeks, the faint freckles across his nose, and her heart ached with a love so fierce it threatened to consume her. She hadn't cried, not yet. Not when she'd grabbed their coats, not when she'd buckled Kieran into the car, not even when she'd checked into this impersonal room with its scratchy sheets and thin curtains. But now, in the quiet, the weight of the day pressed down, heavy and unrelenting. Leslie's words echoed in her mind. A spoiled kid like you, just like your mother, each syllable a dagger that cut deeper than Molly had thought possible. She'd tried so hard to bridge the gap, to understand Leslie's coldness, but the humiliation of Kieran, her innocent boy, had shattered her restraint. And yet, beneath the anger, a deeper pain stirred, one rooted in a childhood spent craving love she'd never received. Molly's thoughts drifted to her past, to the cramped house of her aunt, where she'd grown up among cousins who had parents to claim them. She'd been the odd one out, the girl whose parents were a faded photograph on a shelf, their absence a wound that never healed. Her aunt had been kind enough, but stretched thin, her affection doled out in fleeting moments between chores and arguments. Molly had learned early to be invisible, to swallow her longing for a mother's embrace, a father's pride. She'd built walls around her heart, sturdy and tall, until Tucker and Kieran had shown her what it meant to be seen, to be loved. She'd sworn her son would never know the ache she'd carried, but tonight, watching Kieran's quiet acceptance of Leslie's rejection, she felt that old wound reopen, raw and bleeding. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She stood, smoothing her sweater, and opened it to find Tucker, his coat dusted with snow, his hazel eyes heavy with worry. "Molly," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he stepped inside and pulled her into his arms. She sank into his embrace, her cheek against the cold fabric of his coat, and for the first time that night, she let herself lean into his strength. "I'm so sorry," Tucker whispered, his hands gentle on her back. "I should have been there. I should have seen it." His voice cracked, and Molly felt the tremor in his chest, the weight of his guilt. She pulled back, searching his face, and saw the pain etched there, pain for her, for Kieran, for the family he'd hoped they could be. "It's not your fault," Molly said, her voice soft but firm. She glanced at Kieran, still asleep, and lowered her voice. "You couldn't have known. You were working, like always." There was no accusation in her words, only a quiet acknowledgement of their life, of Tucker's dedication that she loved even when it blinded him to moments like this. Tucker followed her gaze to Kieran, his expression crumpling. "He didn't deserve that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom. I confronted her, Molly. I told her everything. About you, about the company." Molly's breath caught, her eyes widening. "You told her I'm your boss?" she asked, a mix of surprise and unease swirling in her chest. She'd kept that secret for years, not out of shame but to protect Tucker's pride, to preserve the delicate balance of their family. She'd wanted Leslie to see her as a daughter-in-law, not a threat. But now the truth was out, and she wasn't sure what it meant. Tucker nodded, his jaw tight. "She needed to know who you are," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "She's been wrong about you from the start, thinking you're using me, controlling me. I told her you founded the company, that you've been carrying us all along, and you hid it to keep the peace. She didn't know what to say. I've never seen her like that." Molly's heart twisted, a tangled knot of relief and sorrow. She'd wanted Leslie to understand her, to see her strength, but not like this, not at the cost of their Christmas, of Kieran's heart. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to fight with her, Tucker. I just wanted her to love Kieran, to be the grandmother he needs. He's got no one else." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her past. She sank onto the bed, her hands trembling as the tears she'd held back finally spilled over. "When I was a kid," she said, her voice barely audible, "I used to lie awake at night, imagining what it would be like to have a mom, a dad, someone who saw me. I didn't want that for Kieran. I thought Leslie could be that for him, but she broke his heart tonight, and I couldn't stop it." Tucker knelt before her, taking her hands in his eyes shining with tears of his own. "You didn't fail him," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion. "You're his world, Molly. You protected him, got him out of there. And I'm here now. We'll figure this out together. I promise." Molly nodded, her tears falling freely now, a release of the pain she'd carried all day. She looked at Kieran, sleeping so peacefully, and felt a flicker of strength beneath her grief. She'd grown up building walls, but with Tucker and Kieran she'd learned to build bridges instead. Even now, after Leslie's cruelty, she couldn't bring herself to tear the family apart. She wanted to heal, to find a way for Kieran to have the grandmother she'd never had. "I don't want to hate her," Molly said, her voice soft but resolute. "I want to build something better, for Kieran's sake. I don't know how, but I have to try." She squeezed Tucker's hands, drawing strength from his presence, from the love that had carried them through every storm. Tucker leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're incredible," he said, his voice thick with admiration. "And whatever comes next, we'll do it together." Molly managed a small smile, her heart still heavy but lighter now, buoyed by Tucker's love and the quiet promise of a new path. As she looked at Kieran, dreaming of spaceships, she knew she'd fight for him, for the family they could still become. The road ahead was uncertain, but for tonight, in this small, quiet room, they were enough. The weeks following Christmas slipped by in a quiet haze, each day carrying the weight of unspoken words and unresolved wounds. Molly moved through her routine, work, school drop-offs, bedtime stories, with a mechanical precision, but beneath the surface, her heart was a battlefield. The memory of Leslie's cruelty to Kieran, a spoiled kid like you, just like your mother, lingered like a bruise, tender and raw. She saw it in Kieran's eyes sometimes, a fleeting shadow when he mentioned his grandmother, though he never complained. That silence, that resilience in her 6-year-old son, broke her heart anew each time, fueling a restless ache to make things right. The hotel had been a temporary refuge, a place to shield Kieran from the fallout of Christmas, but they'd returned home soon after, settling back into their life in the city. Tucker was more present now, his phone left untouched during dinner, his eyes searching Molly's for signs of healing. Their conversations were tender but careful, skirting the edges of Leslie's silence. She hadn't called, hadn't written, and Molly knew why. Shame was a heavy thing, and Leslie wore it like armor, too proud to admit her wrongs. Molly understood that pride. She'd seen it in her aunt's house growing up, in the way apologies were swallowed rather than spoken. But understanding didn't erase the pain. Molly sat at the kitchen table one evening, a cup of tea gone cold in her hands, the house quiet save for the distant hum of Tucker reading to Kieran upstairs. Her laptop was open, a spreadsheet of work tasks glowing on the screen, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought of her childhood, of the nights she'd spent in her aunt's attic room, staring at the ceiling, imagining a family that claimed her fully. The longing had never left her, not really. It had just shifted, pouring into Kieran, into the dream of giving him the love she'd craved. Leslie was supposed to be part of that dream, the grandmother who'd fill Kieran's world with warmth. Instead, she'd cast him aside, and the rejection stung Molly as deeply as if it were her own. Her eyes drifted to a photo on the fridge. Kieran and Whitney at last year's Christmas, their faces smeared with cookie frosting, laughing as Leslie looked on. Molly's chest tightened, a mix of sorrow and stubborn hope. She didn't hate Leslie, not even now. Hate was too easy, too final. She'd learned young that breaking was simpler than building, but building was what lasted. She'd built a company from nothing, a marriage with Tucker, a home for Kieran. She could build this too, a family where Kieran was seen, loved, not just by her and Tucker, but by his grandmother. The idea came softly, like a whisper in the dark. Leslie's birthday was approaching, a milestone she'd always celebrated with quiet pride. Molly remembered the stories Tucker told of Leslie's love for simple things, country air, home-cooked meals, the chatter of family. What if she could give Leslie that, not as a confrontation, but as a gesture? A chance to start over, to show Kieran's worth, to bridge the gap widened by misunderstanding. A family getaway, a surprise, somewhere peaceful where they could all be together without the weight of Christmas lingering. Molly's heart raced, a flicker of hope battling the fear of rejection. She opened her laptop, pushing aside work to search for venues. A small village resort caught her eye, nestled in the hills, with cozy cabins and a lake that sparkled under the winter sun. It was perfect, intimate, warm, a place where memories could be made. She began planning in secret, her fingers trembling as she booked the cabins, arranged catering, and coordinated with Heather to ensure Leslie suspected nothing. Each step felt like a defiance of the pain, a declaration that she wouldn't let Leslie's mistakes define their family. But doubt crept in, cold and insistent. What if Leslie rejected this too? What if she looked at Kieran with that same dismissive smirk, or worse, ignored him entirely? Molly's throat tightened, her breath shallow as she imagined Kieran's hopeful face falling again. She closed her eyes, pressing her palms against the table, grounding herself in the memory of his voice. Can we build more spaceships at the hotel? So trusting, so unbroken despite everything. She couldn't shield him from every hurt, but she could fight for his chance at love, even if it meant risking her own heart. Her thoughts turned to Leslie, to the woman who'd raised Tucker with fierce love but guarded her heart so tightly. Molly saw herself in that guardedness, in the walls she'd built as a child to survive her aunt's indifference. Leslie's favoritism wasn't just cruelty, it was fear, maybe, or a need to control what she could in a family that felt distant. Molly didn't excuse it, but she understood it, and that understanding fueled her resolve. She wouldn't let fear win, not for Leslie, not for herself. Tucker's footsteps broke her reverie as he entered the kitchen, his hair mussed from lying beside Kieran. "He's out like a light," he said, his voice soft. He paused, studying her face, and his brow furrowed. "You okay?" Molly hesitated, then turned the laptop toward him, showing the resort's website. "I'm planning something," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of determination and vulnerability. "For Mum's birthday, a family getaway, a surprise. I want to fix this, Tucker. For Kieran. I want him to have a grandmother who loves him, even if it's hard." Tucker's eyes widened, a flicker of admiration mingling with concern. "After everything she said?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with pain. "Molly, you don't have to do this. She doesn't deserve it." Molly's tears welled up, but she held his gaze, her voice steady. "It's not about her. It's about Kieran. I grew up without parents, without anyone to fight for me. I can't let him grow up feeling like he's not enough. If there's even a chance to make this right, I have to try." Her voice broke and she wiped her eyes, a shaky smile breaking through. "I'm tired of breaking, Tucker. I want to build." Tucker crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. "You're the strongest person I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever you need, I'm with you. Always." Molly leaned into him, her tears soaking his shirt, her heart a tangle of grief and hope. She thought of Kieran, dreaming upstairs, and of the resort waiting to hold them all. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the risk of more pain, but she felt a quiet strength rising within her, forged in the fires of her past and her love for her son. She would build this bridge not just for Kieran, but for the family she'd always longed for, one step at a time. The village resort nestled in the winter hills was a vision of serenity, its wooden cabins glowing warmly against the snow-dusted pines. The lake nearby shimmered under a pale January sun, and the air carried the crisp scent of frost and cedar. Molly stood on the porch of the main lodge, her breath visible in the cold, her heart a tangled knot of hope and fear. The family had arrived that morning, lured by a vague invitation Molly had crafted through Heather, and Leslie still had no idea this was her birthday surprise, orchestrated by the daughter-in-law she'd so deeply wronged. Molly's hands trembled as she adjusted a string of fairy lights along the railing, each movement a prayer that this gamble would heal rather than break. Inside the lodge, the family gathered around a long table set with a feast: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie, Leslie's favourites, chosen with care. Kieran and Whitney darted between chairs, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the adults' subdued chatter. Tucker stood by the fireplace, his eyes meeting Molly's through the window, offering a quiet nod of encouragement. Heather, still navigating her mother's strained silence since Christmas, helped arrange the plates, her glances toward Molly filled with gratitude and unease. Leslie sat at the head of the table, her silver hair catching the firelight, her expression guarded but softened by the unfamiliar setting. Molly watched her, searching for a crack in the armour of pride that had kept them apart. The weight of the past weeks pressed against Molly's chest, Leslie's cruel words, Kieran's quiet hurt, the sleepless nights spent planning this moment. She'd poured her heart into this getaway, driven by a stubborn hope that love could mend what resentment had torn. But doubt gnawed at her, a cold whisper that Leslie might reject this gesture, might look at Kieran with that same dismissive smirk. Molly's throat tightened, her childhood memories surging, nights in her aunt's house yearning for a family to claim her, feeling like a ghost in her own life. She'd vowed Kieran would never know that loneliness, but standing here, on the edge of this fragile hope, she felt like that little girl again, bracing for rejection. "Dinner's ready," Molly called, her voice steadier than she felt. She stepped inside, smoothing her sweater, and took her seat beside Kieran, whose eyes sparkled with excitement. As the family ate, the conversation flowed tentatively. Stories of past birthdays, Heather's tales from the hospital, Tucker's quiet humour. Leslie remained quiet, her fork moving slowly, but Molly caught her glancing around, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. After dessert, Molly stood, her heart pounding. "I have something to say," she said, her voice trembling but clear. The room stilled, all eyes on her. "Today's not just a family trip. It's a celebration. For Mum's birthday." She paused, meeting Leslie's startled gaze. "I planned this because family matters. Because I want us to be together, really together, no matter what's happened." Leslie's mouth opened, then closed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "You did this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with disbelief. "For me?" Molly nodded, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "Yes, for you, for all of us. I know things have been hard, but I believe we can be better. For the kids, for each other." Her voice broke and she looked at Kieran, whose small hand slipped into hers under the table, grounding her. Kieran stood then, his cheeks flushed with nervous excitement. He pulled a small, clumsily wrapped package from his pocket and stepped toward Leslie, his eyes wide with hope. "Grandma," he said, his voice soft but clear, I made this for you. Happy birthday. Leslie's hands trembled as she took the gift, her eyes locked on Kieran's face. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small Lego heart, its red and white blocks carefully pieced together. It's for love, Kieran said, his voice earnest. So you know I love you. The room was silent, the weight of Kieran's words hanging like a fragile thread. Leslie's breath hitched, her eyes glistening as she clutched the tiny heart. Molly watched, her heart in her throat, every fibre of her being willing Leslie to see Kieran, to feel his love. She thought of her own childhood, of the gifts she'd never given, the love she'd never received, and the tears she'd held back spilled over, silent but unstoppable. I've been blind, Leslie said, her voice cracking as she looked at Kieran, then Molly. All these years, I thought you were keeping Tucker from me, Molly. That you were using him, controlling him. And I let that spill onto Kieran. She paused, her tears falling now, her voice raw with regret. I was wrong. So wrong. I'm sorry, Kieran. I'm sorry, Molly. Molly's chest ached, a flood of relief and sorrow washing over her. She wanted to hold on to her anger to shield herself from more hurt, but Kieran's hopeful smile melted her defences. It's okay, Grandma, he said, stepping closer, and Leslie pulled him into her arms, her sobs muffled against his small shoulder. Molly stood, her legs unsteady, and crossed to Leslie. It's never too late, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't want to fight, Mom. I want you to be Kieran's grandmother, to be my mother. Can we try? Leslie looked up, her face streaked with tears, and nodded. Yes, she whispered. I want that. I've been so foolish, so caught up in my own nonsense. Please let me try. Molly knelt beside her and they hugged, Leslie's arms trembling as she clung to her daughter-in-law. Molly felt the weight of her childhood lift, just a little, replaced by a fragile hope. She'd built this moment, not just for Kieran but for herself, for the family she'd always dreamed of. Tucker watched, his eyes shining with pride, and Heather wiped her own tears, smiling softly. As the fire crackled and the family began to talk again, Molly sat back, Kieran's hand in hers, and felt a quiet peace settle over her. The road ahead would take work, but tonight, in this warm lodge, they'd taken the first step. Leslie's heart had opened, and for the first time, Molly believed they could be whole. The winter sun hung low over the village resort, painting the snow-covered hills in hues of gold and pink. The air was crisp, filled with the laughter of children and the soft crunch of boots on the frosty path. Inside the main lodge, the fire crackled warmly, casting a glow over the long table now cleared of dinner plates and strewn with board games and half-eaten slices of birthday cake. Molly stood by the window, a mug of hot cocoa warming her hands, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The ache of Christmas still lingered, a faint scar, but here, in this moment, she felt something new. Peace, fragile but real, like the first green shoot after a long winter. Kieran and Leslie sat cross-legged on the rug by the fireplace, a sprawling Lego creation taking shape between them. Kieran's voice bubbled with excitement as he explained his design, a castle with turrets and a drawbridge. See, Grandma, this is where the knights live, he said, holding up a cluster of grey blocks, his hazel eyes bright with pride. Leslie leaned in, her silver hair catching the firelight, her smile soft and genuine. That's incredible, Kieran, she said, her voice warm with a tenderness Molly had never heard before. You're so clever. Show me how the drawbridge works. Molly's chest tightened, a wave of emotion washing over her, relief, joy, and a quiet grief for the time lost to misunderstanding. She watched Leslie's hands, once so quick to dismiss, now steady and attentive as she placed a block where Kieran directed. This was what she'd dreamed of for her son, a grandmother who saw him, who cherished him. The sight stirred memories of her own childhood, of nights spent longing for a parent's love, but instead of pain, she felt a deep gratitude. She'd built this moment not just for Kieran, but for herself, for the family she'd always wanted. Her eyes stung with tears, but they were tears of healing, of a wound finally closing. Tucker joined her at the window, his arm slipping around her waist. "Look at them," he said, his voice low and thick with emotion. "You did this, Molly. You made this happen." His hazel eyes, so like Kieran's, shone with admiration, and Molly leaned into him, her heart swelling with the love that had carried them through every storm. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You stood up for us, Tucker. You made her see the truth." She thought of that night at Leslie's, of Tucker's fierce defense, his revelation about her role as his boss. It had been a turning point, a crack in Leslie's armor that had led to this day. But more than that, it was Tucker's unwavering support, his quiet strength, that had given her the courage to keep building. Tucker shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're the gem, Molly. I knew it the day I married you, but this..." He gestured to the room, Kieran and Leslie laughing, Heather and Whitney joining in with their own Lego contributions, the warmth of a family whole again. "This is you, your heart, your strength. You took a broken mess and made it beautiful." Molly's tears spilled over now, silent and unashamed. She thought of her childhood, of the girl who'd felt invisible, who'd learned to build walls to survive. That girl was still there, but she was softer now, surrounded by love she'd fought for. She looked at Kieran, his small hands working alongside Leslie's, and felt a profound fulfillment. She'd given him what she'd never had, a grandmother's love, a family that saw him. And in doing so, she'd found her own healing, a mother-in-law who'd finally called her daughter. Heather approached, her smile tentative but warm. "Molly, this was perfect," she said, her voice catching. "I didn't know if Mom would ever, change. But you did it. You brought her back to us." She squeezed Molly's hand, and Molly returned the gesture, grateful for Heather's quiet support through the planning, for her willingness to trust this vision. Leslie looked up from the rug, catching Molly's eye. For a moment their gazes held, and Molly saw something new in Leslie's expression. Gratitude, humility, a promise to do better. Leslie stood, brushing off her knees and crossed to Molly, Kieran trailing behind her, clutching a Lego knight. "Molly," Leslie said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I don't deserve what you've done. This day, this place, it's more than I could have asked for. Thank you." Molly's throat tightened, but she smiled, her voice steady. "Your family, Mom. That's what matters." She reached out, and Leslie pulled her into a hug, her arms strong and warm, a mother's embrace Molly had craved her whole life. Kieran squeezed between them, giggling, and the three of them laughed, the sound mingling with the crackle of the fire. As the evening wound down, the family gathered around the table for one last game, their voices overlapping in a joyful cacophony. Molly sat beside Tucker, Kieran on her lap, and watched Leslie across the table, her face alight with a warmth that had been absent for so long. The closing image was simple but profound. Kieran and Leslie, side by side, building a Lego castle together, their hands moving in sync, a testament to the love that had triumphed over pain. Molly leaned her head against Tucker's shoulder, her heart full. Life would go on, with its challenges and imperfections, but this new chapter was theirs. A family forged not by blood alone, but by forgiveness, resilience, and the quiet power of building connections. She'd married a gem, Tucker had said, but as she looked at her son and the family around